During the Nazi regime, there was a person by the name of Rav Yerucham who was officiating as a rabbi in Poland at the time in the 1930s. He never actually lived long enough to live till the Holocaust. And he writes over there about his readings in the newspaper of the Stürmer. Streicher, who was one of the people in the Nazi regime. But during that time period, he writes that every time I would read this newspaper, I would read everything about all the problems that the Jews are causing, everything that they do. He always says, Kol bilbulim mishtuyot, all the upside down and confusing words. One word is not connected to the next. It's on a constant basis, hard to read and hard to follow the connection in the newspaper, but the common denominator between the whole entire thing is the Jews are to blame. Yeah, in general, we always know, and it's always been a fact of life, that when Jews lived in Russia, then they were always the socialists who were the enemy. When the Jews lived in Germany, they were always the communists who were the enemy. Any time that they felt, and as we know, there was a book called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, who spoke about the power of the Jews and how they're taking over the world, and their great riches, and their incredible intelligence. And at the same time, there was the battle on the other side that were saying that they were weak and they were poor, parasites, vermin, people that were always sucking up from other people. On another contrast, in one aspect, they were always called the Am HaNivchar. They refer to themselves as the special nation, the nation that's separate. They don't know how to mix in with everybody else. They always act different and do different things than everybody else. But of course, as we all know, especially there in Germany, the complaint was that they're trying to mix in with us. They're mixing in too much. They're not separating from us. They're trying to intermarry. And it's their fault for everything that's occurring. On another contrast, and a more interesting one, of course, is we know that they were blamed for not being very nimusi, very culturally educated. They act with being unclean, not always being appropriate. If I could use an expression of sometimes putting their finger in their nose, especially there were videos which I used to always see, that I was shown once what they used to express of the Jews being very lowly people. And at the same time, there was an opposite complaint, especially during the bubonic plague, that we were known as the ones that the plague didn't come to us because we were always washing our hands and everything was always clean. So it didn't happen, and they blame the plague on the Jews. No matter where we go, from the Cossacks to the Spanish Inquisition, if it's to the Russian Bolshevik Revolution, anywhere that we've been, and of course the Nazi regime, which I obviously don't have to mention, anywhere we've been, it seems to be that we've always been the brunt of everyone's complaint. Anywhere that a Jew's been, it's always, quote unquote, been his fault. And he writes over there in the newspaper, Rav Yerucham, he said that it's incredible how even for one Jew in this big German place that they were willing to make a whole stink about one Jew or two Jews. Aren't they embarrassed because of one person or two people? And of course we all know the expression is that we're one sheep among 70 Ze'evim, 70 wolves, which is appropriate extremely right now. A little Israel with its few kilometers that you can walk from the sea to the sea in a day or two. And still we're surrounded by thousands of kilometers of land that is surrounding us from Arab territory, and we're surrounded from all the sides. But the answer is, as he writes over there, HaMilchama atzma hiya tachlit. But the answer is because the war itself, that's the purpose. That's where it's supposed to be. The pogroms are meant to be. They're only there because that's what's going to lead us eventually to the final days. V'lo echad bilvad amad aleinu lechalotenu. We've had 2,000 years of this. Every time it's a different picture. Every ugly face has risen and eventually fallen to the sidelines. It's never changed, and it's always been like that. But we always know, like I said, the bottom line is it always seems to be it's coming from the Jews. Anti-Semitism has followed the Jews like a shadow. A shadow anywhere you walk, no matter what or no matter how, and you don't even know why, but it just seems to chase after you. It seems to go wherever you've tried to do. We've tried our best to stay away, but it doesn't work. It's funny that the Gemara actually writes at Sinai, Har Sinai, where the Torah was received, where the Bible was received on Har Sinai, is from Lashon Sin'av, hatred. Because from then and on, that's it, we had a proclamation against us that we would be hated. We would be a people that would never be given a fair chance. We're a people that would be driven from side to side. And Ramosha Feinstein, one of the great poskim, one of the great people who attributed halacha, writes this. He says that when he's writing over there about never acting up or doing something inappropriate in America, he says, because he says, even in a malchut shel chesed, even in a place where they're good to us, they can always turn their back. They can start protesting anytime. They could say, we don't want the Jews, we don't want the existence of the Jews. And how intelligent was that statement? How much did he know? How much was he able to make such a claim? That's the words of the of Ramosha Feinstein. And there's one other thing that the Ramosha adds is, of course, that the Chazal tell, the rabbis say that there's a halacha. The law is that Esav sonat Yaakov, Esav, the arch enemy of Yaakov, the brother of Yaakov, but he's on the other side of the rainbow, will always hate him. No matter what happens, he will always hate him. He says, why is it called a law? You should just say it's an opinion, it's a way of thinking, it's an act, because he says it's just something in the nature of the world. No matter what we try to do, no matter how much we try to get closer, no matter how we try to fix that problem, it will never work. The hatred will always be there, it will not stand. The Jews have been for 2,000 years wandering from place to place, and every time there was one thing that was always stated to them. All the time, the same thing is, get out of here. Why are you taking over our land? Why are you busy here? That's why we were thrown out of Spain. That's why we were thrown out of Germany. We were thrown out of Poland, out of Russia. Anywhere we went, we were always made the same claim, get out. Why are you guys such leeches, such parasites? Can't you find your own place? Finally, after an incredible amount of work, an incredible amount of doing everything they could, losing many lives, but because of God's help, they were able to finally find a land. They were able to build up a place which they never had before. They finally did it and decided to leave all the European lands, to leave as far as possible and not to come back again. When they finally get here, what are they telling us? Get out. We don't want you here either. The answer is, where do we want you? Well, there's a proclamation that's being stated from the river to the ocean. The river to the ocean is the answer to that question. Please go in the ocean, because there's no place for you on dry land. We're not interested for you to be anywhere, and it's not something that we're interested in any type of following up. It's an incredible thing which I've never been able to figure out. The claim against the Jews, or Israel specifically, is that genocide. You're killing innocent people. These are citizens that were born, and young children that were born in Gaza, and they were born there as innocent people. So I haven't figured out, so why then are Israelis, or little children and women and men who have not done anything, citizens that have not done anything, also deserve to be driven to the bottom of the depths of the ocean? What's the difference? If you hold that genocide is incorrect, or if there's something wrong about killing innocent people who don't do anything, so why is one more of a claim than the other? Why should the Palestinians be the one who should be able to stay on the land, and the ocean and the Jews should be the one that should be under the water? I haven't figured it out. They're also innocent just as he is. So the answer is, of course, because they're not innocent. All 9 million people that are living in this country, 9 million people that are living in this country, in Israel, are obviously all guilty. They're all guilty, not just the army, not just the Memshala, not just the government. Everybody has a guilt process on their heads, and therefore that makes them freedom fighters. Hamas are freedom fighters. They're doing everything just for the sake of freedom, and therefore they're allowed to kill young little children. They're allowed to kill men, women, and children completely innocently, who are having a party without affecting anyone, and they're allowed to decapitate people, burn people's bodies, because it's all in the sake of freedom. This is an incredible proclamation. We didn't realize what freedom these people have. And in case any people don't know, they themselves have made the claim. When they were interrogated, they said that they raped many people. Many people were abducted and raped. Of course, that's also in the sake of freedom. Why not? Once you're free, you can do anything. Why have any limitations? It doesn't make a difference. That's the credible thing, that we're waving the flag, the Palestinian flag, in order to let them know that they can do whatever they want. And you know what? That's a blast from the past. Seder, a month ago, it was all over, so they went ahead and they did something that was incorrect. So now it's time to let them repent, let them feel better. 240 people living 10 stories down in the ground, underneath a cave, hiding there, being able to barely breathe. They're given the minimal amount of rations, and people are still claiming about the poor Azatim who are getting 100 truckloads of food a day. And these people who are sitting captured, these 240 people who are sitting captured, are starving to the grim. But no, there's no protests against that, because again, everything's in the sake of freedom. Once everything's in the sake of freedom, it all goes. There's nothing wrong. You understand? It's all good. When they go and they take over America after Israel, and they move on to America, which Hamas openly claims that they hate with a passion the Western world, and they're very happy to go ahead and do what the Taliban did in 9/11. They have no problem doing that. So after that, they'll go ahead and do the same thing to them. It won't be something of disturbing. Now, of course, we know that when we talk about, again, innocent people that are being not treated, there's literally a bombardment of tens of thousands of missiles that are being thrown, bombarding an incredible amount of houses. Schools have been blown up because of these missiles that are falling into Israel. But why is no one ever paying attention to that? The answer is because, again, all 9 million people are guilty. Every single person in this country is a guilty walking cause, and there's no reason for their existence. And they don't want them in America, because it's so interesting how all the protests that are taking months, the Israeli protests, are peaceful rallies, as opposed to nobody wants to get anywhere in the vicinity of a Palestinian protest. Because we know, as it's already been a couple people that have died from it, that there's violence. I don't understand. I thought the Israelis were the tyrants. I thought the Israelis were the ones who were violent. The Jews are violent people. Here they are being very violent to Palestinians, and nobody seems to be scared to go to their protests. Everyone's worried about the Palestinian protests. Personally, for those of you who have never been walked around in Israel, nobody has a problem with Arabs walking around in the country, but nobody will dare step foot into any Arab land, any Arab territory, because they all know that it's off with the head if they do. That's what happens. Just a couple points that needs to be proclaimed. And of course, as many people have said, anything you say doesn't work because nobody wants to listen. But this is for those who care to listen and just understand a little bit from just the basics of history, if you could know. If you look at, I would just want to take a quick trivia question. How much older is the Palestinian flag more than the Israeli flag? If the Israeli flag was in 1948, so how many years before that was the Palestinian flag? Obviously, the Palestinian flag is much older because everyone's screaming up and down that Palestine was here to stay and it's been around for a while. The answer is none of the above. It was built 20 years later. The creation of the flag was in the 60s. Only after Israel decided to claim the land, suddenly the Palestinians woke up and decided. So you're wondering why not? Why wasn't there a Palestinian flag? The answer is obvious, because there was no infrastructure here. There were no Palestinians. There was a bunch of nomads walking around back and forth. There was about 10, 20, 30,000 people here of Arabs, and there were a good number of Jews. There were more Arabs than Jews, but it was under British Empire. There was no Palestinian state at all. It didn't exist. And not only that, they didn't have any infrastructure. There was a house here, a house here. There was no streets and buildings and electricity and water system. There was nothing doing here. It was just a bunch of hobos and nomads that were here, that were walking from place to place. People who tried to make it to live here didn't make it. There's a whole paragraph from Mark Twain. You can look it up on Google, where he writes, and when he was stepping on the land, he writes at the incredible fallowness of the land, what we call shomamut. It was completely barren. There was nothing here. There was nothing here existent. There was just people walking from here to there. There was barely any crops being grown. They had to receive it from other lands, and there was nothing doing here. Until finally, the Jews decided to move in. They built kibbutzim. They drew the land. They drained the swamps. They built buildings. They were able to build streets, put in an infrastructure of electricity and water, etc., etc., etc. It came from a lot of sweat, a lot of what we call mesirut nefesh, of giving over of a person, of as much as they were able to give over of their own lives, of much of themselves. They literally died on the land just to be able to make sure that they can create it. And it's an incredible, because there is a prophecy in Isaiah that writes clearly that for 2,000 years this land, it doesn't say there were 2,000 years, but the land will remain fallow and there will be no infrastructure here. No one will have any claim to the land, and there will not be a claim to the land. Only after eventually the time when the Jews will come back to the land and take over, suddenly it will grow its fruits. Suddenly there will be a new growth that never existed here. Something will suddenly happen. So here we have it, that nothing was around at the time. There was no Palestinian flag. There was no Palestinian state. There was nothing here. It was a bunch of Arabs. And if anything was, there was a British Empire who they're not sitting here claiming the land. On the contrary, they're actually claiming that why don't you just leave Israel alone? The same people who owned it and the ones who gave it over to us in the first place. That's the simple claim that happened to be. And after all this, if we could just say, for those non-history buffs, because I have no question that all of those people waving those Palestinian flags know zero, absolutely zero about history. They just know what they were told, and not much more than that. Is that if you look, the Jews were sitting on this land in Israel, what's known as Eretz Yisrael, for 1,200 years. That's not a long time. That's not a little bit of time. America's been around for 250 years. 1,200 years they were here until they were beaten up by those same tyrants that you're talking about. The Romans came in bloodthirsty. Rivers of blood were flowing here. Rivers of blood. When the temple was destroyed, we had 2 temples here, and we were always sitting here with no competition. There was no one else here. The land was known as ours. So interesting that it's called Israel. It's known as Eretz Yisrael because that's what it always has been from the time that we had it. And we claimed it from 3,000 years ago. So then we had it for those 1,200 years until we were thrown out head and foot. The land was left fallow, as we spoke about, for a good strong 2,000 years with, like I said, people in passing bys in between one Arab country to the next, were on their way from one place to the next. There was no infrastructure. And that's an incredible thing, how people can just go ahead and make claims, and we just wonder. And I sit and I ask this as a question. I don't even ask it as a claim. Please explain to me. If someone knows how to explain to me, where are the tyrants? So you'll say that the Israel are the tyrants? I have a bigger question. I don't understand. In the 20s, there was the Hebron massacre. 30 innocent boys who were here in a yeshiva that were learning were killed. And there were many other terrorist attacks that were done during that time. There was no army, there was no Medina, there was no country, there was nothing. It was now claimed for Israel. So why were the Arabs doing it? Again, we were tyrants? We were not tyrants. We were sitting here innocently doing nothing. The answer is that the Arabs are the tyrants. They're the ones who are scary. Nobody will ever walk into an Arab land. Trust me, nobody's taking vacations in Ramallah or Gaza or in the Hebron or in these types of places. They're not going to these places because they know they're going to get lopped off. So you'll tell me, what about the Arabs? And this is the clincher question. And if someone can answer me this question, I will really be happy to understand. You say, what about the Arabs? There are literally tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Arabs that are living in Israel's structure. They all carry a social security, what we call a Teudat Zahut, and there are 20% of the parliament members are Arabs who are as rich as I wish I could be my whole entire life. They're sitting in the most comfortable houses. Many of these Arabs that are sitting here are incredibly wealthy, and even the ones who are middle class are no different than most Israelis here. They live a completely democratic life, Jew and Arab side by side. Of course, here and there, there's a fist fight here and there that comes up, but beside it, that's just the way the world is. But they're living very comfortably here. So what's the difference between Gaza and all those people? All these incredible Arabs that are living completely comfortably mixed into society. No borders they have to cross. They have all over the place. They're living in the areas next to Afula, what we call the Sumerian area. They're living in many areas all over the place. Like I told you, they're even in the government positions. There's no question. What's the difference? So why in Gaza are they put behind this fence that we're calling them the hostages? That we're saying the answer is because when people act like animals, you have to put them behind a fence. Have you ever gone to the zoo? Usually when you go to the zoo, the animals are behind fences. Oh, it's not so nice to do it, but I'm not interested in the lion being on the other side of the fence. We all know that it's that. If they would act like decent human beings, we have no problem opening the fence. We've done it to every other place. Everyone else is not behind locked doors. They're left in. Instead, when they act like that, then you can't trust them. And how do I know you can't trust them? I want to tell you something. For those who don't know, and I'm sure many of us know, the people that are held hostages right now, and those 1,400 people that were killed were there in a peace party. Not only in the peace party, people should know, and we know many of the people that were doing it, many of those people that were in this peace party, you know what? Many of the people that were at this peace party and are in the claims, they were buying toys for the children of the Azan team. They were only employing Azan team in order to give them what we call panasat, to give them some work to be able to do it. They would send them food. They'd go shopping for them. They felt for their situation. These were leftists at their best, progressivenessers, the same ones who are waving the flags in the colleges over there, the ones who are making the claims. They're all progressive, just like they're waving the gay rainbow flags. They're also waving the Palestinian flags side by side. Even though, which of course I still haven't figured out, because the Palestinians hate gays and lesbians. Anyone who gets killed, you get capital punishment for being a gay and lesbian. So I don't understand how people are waving the rainbow flag together with the Palestinian flag. If someone can explain that to me also, I'd be happy to hear. But in any case, what we're saying is these people who were big lovers of the Palestinians, they cared about them, and here they are. They didn't just get brutally killed, they got burnt to the stake, they got their heads chopped off, and they got to see their own children being killed in front of their faces as they're being held captive. I don't understand, all in the sake of freedom, again, to the same people who were so brutal to them that were buying toys for these same children that they're doing this to. That's what happened. And with a final, if I could just finish and just mention one last thing, if it's okay, and that is that we'll make a deal. It was decided Israel's going to make a deal. Israel's going to give back the whole entire country back to the Palestinians. That's it. We give up. We wave the white flag. This country will be given back to all the Palestinians. Fair is fair. Because what's the claim? The claim is the Palestinians were here first. They deserved it. And it was always them that were here all the time. So why are you taking it out? It's time to give it back. No problem. We're speaking to Benjamin Netanyahu. It's going to him. And he's going to give back the whole entire land to the Palestinians. We just have one claim that needs to be ironed out, and you can finish that one up, it's going to be done. And that is, all you fantastic Americans over there that are living in a comfortable America. I don't know if you know any American history, maybe a little bit of American history. You don't have to go back more than 100 and a little bit years, 130 years, but their land was swimming with Indians. From sea to shining sea was all Indians. This is not even a question. Until now, we've been questioning Palestinian claim to the Israel land. There's no question that the whole America was swimming with Indians that were there and had many different families. They were all in different tribes, different Siaks, every different tribe that there is. There's a whole different, open it up and, check on your... You can check it up on Wikipedia, right? See how many different things they are. Where are all these Indians? Up in some high mountain with just a few, fast and few. Most of them are in a museum. It's very nice of you to open a Knott's Berry Farm as a tribute to the Indians, but they're sitting there as a tribute and they don't exist. We don't see the Redskins. They're not around. We appreciate that you named a football team after them, but that's about as far as it goes. The Indians don't exist. They're not around. You know why? Because they were beaten, pummeled, killed, brutally massacred. The Wild West is all an acclamation from it, and they're all finished. And you're sitting comfortably in your chairs on your lazy boys watching the news on TV and saying, these Israelis, they're just not nice. So like we said, a tit for a tat, no problem. Israel will give it up. You give it up. Don't tell me a difference of years, because I don't think 150 years and 70 years and 150 years makes much for a difference. Of course, the independence was in 1776, but the Indians were still around, still trying to claim their fame, still trying to keep on to their land, but apparently nobody was interested. There was no constitutional rights, and yes, they are finished. They don't exist anymore. Like I said, it's something that's completely academic. You can learn about them in university, but that's about it. So if a person wants to be fair is fair, and of course the answer is to everything I said, as we all know, when a person wants to ask answers, there are no answers. If a person wants to ask questions, then maybe there is, maybe to think about it. And again, we don't mind hearing responses, but there is only one thing. When we talk about there's freedom of speech, unfortunately in America there's no freedom of thought. It's just freedom of speech. People just talk without thinking. Stop for a few minutes, think about it, make sure that your claims are correct. Not just because you grew up that way. Now, if you're a Palestinian or you grew up Arab, there's nothing to do. It's in the blood, and your parents will kill you if you go against them. We all know that's the way it is because you have no choice. But at least if a person is an American or he comes from a place of a little bit of thinking, and it's talking about free thinking, and like we said, you're progressive, and that's why you have to move ahead, but it has to come with a little bit of what we call in Hebrew, hidbonenut, acclamation, understanding, comprehension, to think a little bit before we make those claims. Take a little bit, chew this over for size, and we pray to God that everybody will come to the same place and that there always should be peace and happiness together, because we all know if Hamas will get removed from this land, then there will be peace and happiness in this land, Palestinian and Israeli alike.